Yeah, you have different capacities to navigate that space. You have different strategies. And I mean, people who build autonomous vehicles have, they think about that stuff all the time, right? You want to get from here to there, but you're not just going to do as the crow flies unless you hit a barrier. You've got all sorts of different tricks up your sleeve about both local and maybe global, sometimes global information too, sometimes not. Um, but one in particular that I really like that we use a lot is I for lack of a better word, I call it delayed gratification. It just means, are you able to temporarily get further from your goal in order to then do better later? Some systems can't, right? They're always, and I've got a great picture I took of two dogs across a fence, and they're trying to get at each other. There's a hole in the fence 5 feet down, but in order to do that, you have to get away from where you want to go. And they're just like they're like this, right? And maybe they'll figure it out eventually, or maybe they won't. But that's that ability to get further away is I think pretty critical. It's a basic capacity not to get trapped in that local optimum there. And then there's all kinds of complex tricks after that.
So an end run, basically. You may know this already, but primates and birds can do that, and other animals cannot. The classic one is let's see, there's this experiment. You have food, the monkey's in a cage, there's food outside, just outside his reach. There's a stick behind him. And so is he going to figure out that if he turns around, grabs the stick, and then goes back, he can get the food? Yeah. And so evidently primates and birds can do that, and other animals can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of this landscape picture, when we think about an attractor, it's typical to imagine, a potential minimum and then just a smooth surface coming out of it. And that's the simple picture. Whereas in real life, even if you have a fairly deep attractor like Romeo and Juliet, the surface coming out of it is very complicated.
Bumpy attractors.
Yeah, with all sorts of, channels, some of which might be solenoidal even, to keep you from ever getting over the edge. And so these competent systems have to be able to increase their temperature, as Mike was referring to earlier, to get out of local minima in this very complicated landscape that surrounds wherever it is they want to go. But it's also the case that if you think in terms of a static landscape, then that corresponds to an environment that's not malleable by the organism. Whereas again, in real life, what the organism does in navigating the space not only changes its position in the space, but it also changes the shape of the space. The organism actually modifies the environment by taking each action, not just its position in the environment.
And you can change where the attractors are, I suppose.
Right. So the organism can even make the attractor move around based on what it's doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's a sufficiently competent interactor with its environment, and if the environment is sufficiently plastic.
Yeah.
So we see that in social interactions, for example, the environment, the social environment is incredibly plastic. We can change it in various ways just by talking.
Yeah.
Whereas, the environment of the desert is not all that plastic. You can wander around. You don't change where the mountains are.
And so you can imagine, right? So this is important during evolution, I think, because you can imagine. So here I have my thermostat, and all it knows how to do is check the set point and get the temperature, right? Yeah. And then there's a more advanced version of a thermostat, which also has a metacognitive module that makes sure that the set point isn't being twiddled too much. right? That monitors the set point. Now, why do you need that in biology? Because you're constantly at threat of parasites and exploiters of various kinds. So the minute you become programmable, like a thermostat, somebody out there is going to want to change your set point. And so you need to be able to resist that. And in a more advanced version, you need to be able to tell whether it's you resisting it, whether any changes that are made, are you doing it, or is it somebody else doing it to you, right? I think there would be a lot of evolutionary advantage to knowing, why did my set point just change? Did I change it, or did somebody else change it for me? Am I being exploited in some way, right? And as soon as you say that, then it starts to make sense. As somebody, I was just talking to Eric Welker, and he asked me if I thought that how important threat perception was to this whole process. And I was saying that I think it's absolutely critical, because if you weren't in danger of being hacked by competitors, you wouldn't have to have a strong sense of self. In other words, you could remain an ocean of, right? And so I've just been obsessed with this thing that you're an embryo, a blastodisc, so 50,000 cells. And at some point you look at that and it becomes one embryo. And so you look at that and you say, how many embryos are there? People say one embryo. What are you counting when you say one embryo? Well, what you're counting is the following. A bunch of those cells are going to merge together to, among many other things, determine a barrier between themselves and the outside world. So every cell is some other cell's neighbor. And so where do I end and where does the world begin? Well, the embryo is going to make that determination, and you'll have one embryo. If you take a little needle and you make some scratches, and I used to do this in grad school when working in avian embryos, you make some scratches, and until the scratches heal, every individual region which can't hear the other regions becomes an embryo. And when they do heal, you have conjoined twins or triplets. And so the question of how many individuals are in that embryo is not known in advance. It's not genetic. You don't know how many it is. It's something that emerges over time, right? So, and to me, that has really interesting implications for the brain. The same deal. If you didn't know what a human was and I showed you a 3.5 pound brain, I said, how many individuals in there? Who would know? Who knows how many are going to be in there, right? It's this process of taking individual pieces and pulling together some sort of unified something that's distinct from forms some sort of a thing that makes a model of itself as distinct from the environment. So if you weren't at threat of being hacked, you wouldn't need to do that. It wouldn't matter where you wouldn't have to maintain a strong self boundary, because you wouldn't need to know why things are changing, because nobody would be trying to exploit you. But of course, in biology, that doesn't work. You're always at threat of being hacked. And then that, I think, that drives this requirement of determining a strong self-identity, and then having ways to understand whether, am I learning or am I being trained, right? What is I think this is a very important point that Chris was saying about the environment. If it's just you and the desert, the environment is a very low agency thing, and then you can assume that you're the boss. You're learning. I'm deciding what I pay attention to. I'm learning. If you're in a social milieu and you're learning, it could well be that you're actually being trained, right? The partner on the other end is a high agency thing, maybe higher than you, and maybe you're being exploited. And so, right, somebody said, I forget who it was, but somebody gave a talk on how to give talks, and he said every act of writing is a violent act, because what you're hoping to do is to change the listener's cognitive structure, right? Your success means I've reached in there through my signaling, and you walk away from there altered. You believe things you didn't believe before. That's a successful talk, right? So yeah, anyway, so that's what I think. So I think that threat from hacking is maybe what drives. I wanted to show you guys a cool picture. This is something else I've been obsessed with. Where is the here it is. Check this out. So this is you see this thing? This is a gall formed on the leaf by what happens is this wasp embryo induces the flat green cells of the leaf to form this crazy thing. This is what we're up against. This is right. Is if you're a cell that's smart enough to form a leaf, you're also subject to hacking and being made to make something completely different. Right. And that's the arms race you're in. And now every single that comes in, I think, you now have to decide, is that me changing what I do, or is that somebody changing me? So I don't know. That probably has various psychological implications too. Where threat level is somehow proportional to a sense of ego separation. Or does that mean I'm out of my pay grade here? But there's something like that.